that everyone that I was treating was dealing with terror, really primary terror, fear. I couldn't have sold a book that had terror in its title, so it became the fear-driven brain. But really, when you get down to it, people have had these histories of just living in stark ambient terror. So the way that I thought about it has become, if you can mimic the process of regulating the brain that should, with a good enough mother, have happened, then you change the very structure of the brain, at least in its frequency domain. I'm not making any claim for the tissue of the brain or the structures, but in the connections, in the electrical domain of the brain, we make changes. And those changes mean that the person has less fear. They have less fear. There is an inherent pro-social inclination in our systems to move toward the other. Relationships start happening. Good relationships start happening. Intimate relationships you already had become more intimate and become more available to you. The world changes.
Sebern, thank you for meeting with me today and taking the time to talk about some of these things. I'm excited about the conversation. Maybe we could start off with kind of talking about contextually. I have my own sense of kind of how mental health, the idea of approaching mental health, how that's shifted. And I wonder if you can just give a sort of a bird's eye view of the big changes that have really happened. Things have changed a lot in the last 20 years, certainly even in the last 10 years. Like, if you could give us an idea of what that looks like from your perspective.
Well, I think I have to make that very big question into a slightly smaller one. And it's really, how are we looking at trauma? And particularly developmental trauma as distinct from post-traumatic stress. So that's the first big difference, is that a while ago, researchers, including Bessel, Van der Kolk, tried to establish in an official way that there was a big difference between children who had been abused and adults who have traumatic events, or who suffer traumatic events. Their nervous systems will suffer, but there's a qualitatively different impact when this is suffering at the hands of caretakers by children. All right. So that's the first big change. And I think that, I was in the room when Bessel announced that the developmental trauma disorder was not going to be accepted by the DSM. They saw it as, quote, another anxiety diagnosis, and they did another anxiety diagnosis. And, they had marshaled an enormous amount of data about how discernible this problem was in children's functioning across all areas, and the adults they become, sleep, learning, behavior, executive function, immune system, and everything. Emotional regulation, obviously, being primary. Okay. So, so that got turned down, and someone in the audience, we're just pondering what a catastrophe this was, because you can't really think and research something that's not named, right? So we can think about it. So the proposal was just use it anyway. And that was at about the time, use that term, developmental trauma. And it was about that time that I was writing that in my book. So this is not that long ago, 10 years ago, that this was all happening. And it came to the title of the book when I was working with my editor at Norton. And they wanted to talk about it as attachment disorder, which was been better accepted. But the problem is that reactive attachment disorder is only a diagnosis in children. It's not seen as a diagnosis in adults. So I said that I wanted it to be neurofeedback in the treatment of developmental trauma. And they accepted that. But it was a bit of a stretch because neither neurofeedback was not well known, right, or well established in 2014 or 2012, which is when we're naming this book. And developmental trauma wasn't a thing at all, right, officially. So it was a book about two rumors. Oh, the brain can be helped by neurofeedback, and there is this other discrete problem called developmental trauma. So that's where we are, and that's and that both of these, neurofeedback and developmental trauma, have become much more understood, much more accepted, much more used. Both in the sense of clinical use, many more people are using neurofeedback, and that term developmental trauma is hardly controversial anymore. It's really how people refer to the problem that accrue from early childhood neglect and abuse.
And can you maybe talk a little bit about what when, after the book was published, there began to be more interest in the combination of using neurofeedback in addressing this developmental trauma. And I think part of the thing that I've learned in, being part of the your talks and so on, is that there are actually a wider array of symptomatic presentations that actually originate with this idea of developmental trauma. So that seems like part of the thing that is difficult and has changed significantly over the period of time. Can you talk a little bit about how you've come to realize that a lot of these other presentations have their origins in developmental trauma?
Well, yeah, I mean, so the other themes are ones that I began to list, behavioral disorders, impulsivity, even to a certain extent, OCD, what we think of as OCD, executive function disorder, sleep disorders, learning problems. I mean, the list is pretty thorough in terms of the areas of distress that people suffer. So what's the commonality in that, right? If we look at those as discrete disorders, as diseases, we imagine that the mind or some entity organizes itself in terms of discrete disorders. Well, it doesn't. And the brain definitely does not have a compartment for ADHD, or bipolar disorder, or, there's something going on in the brain, and that can explain these what look like diverse symptoms. Something's going on. Okay. So, and then people with histories of developmental trauma suffer this. And the main issue, I think, can be seen as affect regulation, emotional regulation, regulation of the self-regulation. It's not coherent. It's not coherent because if there's an absence of a parent, or the parent usually, there is the brain, and therefore the mind, the mind of the baby doesn't organize. And so that makes it hard to learn, and hard to control behavior, and hard to regulate emotional outbursts or emotion, period. And that's the core problem. And one of the orientations that has changed, which is that this is not primarily or only secondarily a disorder of the mind, a mental disorder. It is a brain disorder. Fundamentally, a lack of organization of the brain that happens when there's good enough mothering, good enough parenting, a mother figure. There's good enough of that. And without that, the baby lives in a constant state of fear, anger, shame. I mean, these primary emotions, there's no offset to them. There's no comfort. There's no, there's only threat. There's no protection. And if you grow up that way, you grow up differently than you would have if you had had that primary protection of the mother and father. And even a fairly flawed version of that we can get by on, right? We have to make compensations. We have to notice what we replicate in our adult relationships and so on and so on. We have to do the work often of psychotherapy to get clear about what we're doing here, but we can get clear on it. Unless you work with the brain of people who have children and adults who have dealt with this level of absence and absence of the parent, and then often the traumatic assaults that can happen to a child who is unprotected like that, we can't ask them to organize through some mentation, through some idea. They can't ask them to organize their brains, and we do. That's the premise of therapy, is that we can help people organize their brains through this talking experience, and we can't. I mean, it's just not true.
So I love this, because they're in a sort of wrapped up in what you're talking about are a number of ideas that I think people who come from mental health in a sort of traditional way will find very challenging. This idea that for example, the outcomes of trauma are not just mental, that they are actually neurophysiological, that they're changes that happen in the brain, they're physical changes. And then the idea that that our approach can be something like neurofeedback, which helps the brain to organize itself better in a more functional way to get that thing. And then the biggest one, I think, is really interesting. You see, you mentioned absence, and I think for me growing up, like, there was very much this idea that trauma is about an assault. It's only a physical thing. And the way you're describing it is that maybe the most damaging part of this is what I've heard you refer to as attachment rupture. The fact that, so this is what makes absence. Am I getting that right? This is what makes absence as damaging as an assault?
I think it's more damaging. And I think it's not even necessarily attachment rupture that is unrepaired, because there's attachment ruptures we're going through all the time. You're, as a father of a young child, repair ruptures all the time, right? Or you didn't come home and you told me, Daddy, you didn't take me to the beach. You have to, we repair those things, right? So that you are reestablished in their world, right? You haven't gone, you're not absent, you haven't left them. Okay. So there's recent research that was done by Caroline Lyons-Ruth at Harvard. And this is research that essentially establishes that it is the failure of attachment, not the rupture of attachment. It could be both, right? But I think it's the failure of attachment that is the primary issue. And in her study, they were looking for what would predict borderline personality disorder. Let's throw that out. Let's say what would predict affect regulation problems, which is really what borderline personality disorder is. It's a affect regulation disorder, or it's affect regulation problems. I don't even think disorder is the right word. It's a fundamental incapacity in the brain to regulate itself. Okay, that's a big problem, right? That's a big problem. And that's what she finds too. This is what the research at Harvard finds too, is that the predictor for that is the mother who withdraws and the baby who keeps trying. When I ask people who use the term borderline personality to stop just for a second and use that instead, the mother who withdraws and the baby who keeps trying, what do they feel? And they feel where there had been no empathy, they feel empathy, right? They turn toward this patient instead of away from this patient. This is so fundamentally important, because the baby who was turned away from will be turned away from. That's what happens in the mental health system. That's why they become suicidal, which is this paradoxical move of suicide to both end the pain and to solicit the vital attention of the other. So it's not just, it's established now. It's established in the research that the damaging element is the absence of the mother, not even the abuse of the mother. And in fact, in that research, they because many of these children suffer abuse, but the abuse washes out completely as a predictor of what she's calling borderline personality disorder and suicidality. It doesn't predict. What does predict is the mother who withdraws.
Part of what I find just really compelling about what you're describing is that in some ways there's sort of a resonance with what the role of the therapist actually is, because what you're describing in some ways is the transferent work of creating attachment with someone who has not had that experience already. And so you're modeling for somebody, this is what an attachment, and explicitly with the language there, right? If the therapist says you have, some disorder, that already doesn't create the attachment in the way that you're framing it. I wonder what, like in interacting with therapists, I picture that there would be a recognition, at least among some therapists, that yes, this makes sense to me. This jives with sort of what my instinct is of what this work is for. This sacred work is a
well, that's my hope, and I think as more and more therapists, we tend in this field, I think, Lars, I think we are beginning to attract young therapists who aren't afraid of computers. But for a long time, it was therapists who were like me, mid-career. They had long enough to pay off their student loans and recognize that what they had learned that they were still paying off on wasn't adequate to the situation, and to look around desperately for what was, right? It wasn't medications. It wasn't CBT or DBT. It wasn't analysis. It wasn't, it wasn't anything that we were practicing. What were we missing? What were we missing? And we could get a clue of this from drugs, right? Because drugs are theoretically non-relational, right? They're doing something in the brain. And we got that, but all we seemed to get about that was that some people need something, they need a med to feel better. We didn't quite get that we were trying to influence the way the brain worked, Right? We didn't sort of nudge in out of the mind into the brain, even with those people who believed that drugs were useful. Drugs, unfortunately, don't teach the brain, right? The brain becomes reliant on what the drugs can do at the synaptic center of the brain, but it doesn't help teach the brain how to make those changes itself. That's what neurofeedback does.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what is that, how do you think of that process of learning that neurofeedback makes possible? Because I've heard you describe before that it has to be a relational process. There needs to be that therapeutic alliance to make it possible. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that works and how you discovered that this is, you've told the story of how you yourself, how you did neurofeedback for yourself, and that sort of opened your eyes to this, maybe this is something that has some promise. But in your work with clients, with people that have these devastating histories.
Well, it's a big question. I think that the easiest pathway to understand it is not completely satisfactory. Is that, well, let's go back to the mother who withdraws. What's she withdrawing from? She's withdrawing from the distress of her baby. Okay, instead of picking her baby up and easing and calming the distress, she's turning away. She doesn't know what to do. This is not mother blaming. It's just a mother doesn't know what to do. Who's carrying her own history of a mother who didn't know what to do. I mean, that's just always what it is. Okay. So, so that distress in all of its varieties carried forward. If the proneness to distress is carried forward. It's the only thing you have. I mean, what's what the brain does. It's just the way what is learned and what it does. And that then becomes different disorders depending on whose office you end up in. If you ended up in a neurologist's office, it might look at this as temporal lobe. If you ended up in a learning specialist office with learning disability, on and on, right? Because they pick the symptom that they knew, but these are all things that traumatized people suffer. And traumatized people now mean people whose mothers have withdrawn, right? So, but the leading indicator of all of this is affect regulation. Because if you have a learning disability and that's it, then you're hardly sometimes coming to the attention of the school system, much less to your parents, much less to the mental health world. It's only when your behaviors are dysregulated and your thinking is dysregulated that you can come to the attention of the people that were in conversation, the profession I'm in. Okay, so my route to all this was noticing after I trained that I had, this is stories in the book, that I had a reduction in fear. I didn't know I lived in the fear that I lived in. It had become background music. It was just every day. I had no way to discern that. It wasn't the easiest thing to learn, right? But I was learning it as it was quieting in me. And that's when I realized that neurofeedback, I was doing neurofeedback with a friend who wanted me to see what it could do, to be her first subject in her first technology with neurofeedback. And that finding was so stunning to me, and it was so clear to me, particularly in that finding, that everyone that I was treating was dealing with terror, really primary terror, fear. I couldn't have sold a book that had terror in its title. I'd like to sell more of this, not less. So it became the fear-driven brain But really, when you get down to it, people who've had these histories are just living in stark ambient terror. And so it became the way that I thought about it has become, if you can mimic the process of regulating the brain that should, with a good enough mother, have happened, then you change the very structure of the brain, and in at least in its frequency domain. I'm not making any claim for the tissue of the brain or the the structures, but in the connections, in the electrical domain of the brain, we make changes, and those changes mean that the person has less fear. They have less fear. There is an inherent pro-social inclination in our systems to move toward the other. Relationships start happening. Good relationships start happening. Intimate relationships you've already had become more intimate and become more available to you. The world changes. And so other than that, I make no claim. I guess it is. Because it's actually what happens. And it will happen to different degrees with different people, and people have different levels of insight into what's going on when these changes happen. So this is not a claim that everyone, this is a eureka moment. And there's another element to this that I'll bring in, because the reality is that there's one part of this problem of the mother who withdraws that we weren't catching. I don't think. I'm still in exploration around this. And that was stuff that became clear to me in the work of Frank Corrigan. So Frank Corrigan is the main author of Deep Brain Reorienting. And what he maintains, and what I will be talking about, and what he will be talking about at Trauma 24, is that when the infant moves toward the mother, and this is not just one time, this is multiple times, and they're turned away from, there's shock, because the expectation, inbuilt expectation of the infant is to be received. And they're not received, they're not cared for. It's gone, it's over. And all this needs to be is the absence of the mother. It doesn't have to be neglect. It doesn't have to be anything as powerful as neglect. In fact, neglect somehow suggests the presence of the other. Right? Somebody's neglecting me. The absence has none of that in it, right? That's a distinction to be made between the idea of neglect and the idea of the experience of neglect and the experience of absence. So when that came to my attention, it took me a little while to catch on to this. The whole idea of the shock phenomenon, but not that theory so much as that you could reach that without neurofeedback. I was a little bit skeptical, to say the least, of this. But then I tried it. And there is an avenue to that shock that we may not have with neurofeedback that we have with DBR. And as you know, this conference in South Africa will be the first time that this is actually the focus of the conference, is how do these two treatments inform our understanding of trauma, and how do they work together? And I don't think this is highlighted in any conference to date, and hopefully will become a theme to be explored in many conferences hereafter.
Yeah, So in deep brain reorienting, there's a real reliance, and it seems to me that a lot of this comes from Frank's own background as a neuroscientist and psychiatrist. But there's a lot of understanding of what's actually happening in the brain. And I guess for someone who is approaching the idea of deep brain reorienting, they can be forgiven by being intimidated by the amount of neuroscience that's involved. So I wonder if you can, walk me through what, as somebody who is about like, show me what provides the outcomes, right? We want the concrete therapeutic skills for doing this stuff. How have you come to understand all of these things about the PAG and the superior colliculus and so on? Can you give any guidance to people who really want to get this, who believe that there is an approach like this?
Yeah, I would like to dismiss Frank's assertion that you need to know the neuroscience, but I can't. So that's the first thing that you're going to want to encounter, is that you come to as a therapist doing DBR, that you understand the fundamentals of the brainstem. Most of the focus of this thinking is on the brainstem, and a lot of it is hypothetical, but it is very powerful hypotheses. And when you do DBR, the way that when we really do DBR, deep brain reorienting, you are, in a sense, following the imprint of the neuroscience. I mean, it's just, and some of it can be simplified, some of it is endlessly complex, but the part that you really need to know can be, as a therapist, can be simplified. And it's just so you know where you are in the process of releasing shock from the brain. This is the whole point of this therapy. It's a non-transferential therapy. It has nothing to do with working through the issues with the mother, except at this point of attachment shock. And it is saying, as long as that shock is still in the brain, and the shock is frequency, right? It's nothing other than frequency. It's a demanding signature of frequency in the brain, response to this attachment rupture or this attachment loss. As long as that's there, you don't have you're at risk. You're at risk of meltdown or difficulty of not being able to think clearly, all of the things that had happened to people with trauma. And, when I asked Frank at one point, why did he develop this? This is years and years of research that has gone into this on his part and then on the brain. His answer was very simple. His answer was, too many people were dying. So the therapies that we had available to us weren't working. And we looked at the individuals as treatment failures, rather than looking at them as indications that our treatments were failing. And so we even if these don't turn out to be the eureka of, if this isn't the it of trauma treatment, which I think it may be, but if it's not, it's sure pointing the way toward, what we need to encounter and think about in terms of how the brain works, and in terms of understanding the developmental trauma as it presents in the relationship and in the mind of trauma survivors from that neurological or neuroscientific perspective.
That's very cool. One of the pieces that's interesting about this, the way that, deep brain reorienting is really taken hold in the EEGer community, is that there is this way that, particularly for EEGer neurofeedback clinicians, there's been this a little bit different therapeutic approach in terms of like approaching the work of working with someone as being this role of empowering their sense, you know, that they're learning how to do this thing, very different from a sort of a traditional, you know, medical model of like, we are going to fix you or whatever. And what strikes me about the deep brain reorienting is that it's even taking that a little bit further. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, because there seems to be really a need for a really different therapeutic approach in terms of like how you develop a relationship with the person you're working with when you're doing deep brain reorienting. And it happens in very subtle ways that 𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 Sands has really described in many of the trainings that I've been part of.
Yeah, so yeah, just so everyone knows, 𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 Sands is the co-developer of deep brain reorienting, and Frank took the neuroscience route and she took the developmental route, and they're together, they make up this theory. And it's taken at least two of them to be able to bring this all together. There's a very profound understanding of the problem and then in treatment, right? So I don't know if I may just have lost track of your question. I think that the nature of the relationship with the therapist is a profound question and not easily answerable, even among people who are practicing DBR. If I can try to put words to what the position of the therapist is challenging to get that right. People kind of know it. How, you know, when they practice it, they know when they're in the right position, but it's hard to describe what that right position is. But it's a therapy that is about enabling being present, having another presence, the therapist, there while you explore the attachment shock, which was the original focus of Frank's work. Okay, he sees now that this can have effects on traumatic shock, of assault, and those kinds of things. But originally, he was looking at how we could resolve this fundamental attachment shock that the research in Harvard was picking up on the same strain. They weren't talking, right? They were just doing their separate pieces and coming to pretty much the same conclusion. So, so the position of the therapist is unique. It's non-transferential because in the this is incidental to it, but the transference would have embedded in it the attachment rupture. That's what you've been working out for 20 years or 30 years in talk therapy, or you'd be ignoring it, trying to finesse it, right? That's what therapy, because that's the core issue. If that's the core issue, it's the core issue. You're saying that it is. How do we reach it? And we can't reach it through transferential therapies because they are embedded in the field of absence in this population and this dilemma. So, it's like we try to be present to the patient, but we know even with Ruth's work, if you take a look at her, maybe you can put this up in the recording, but if you take a look at her research on the default mode network, which is the network in the brain that underwrites the self, you can see the lack of activity in that network in people who have histories of trauma, severe trauma. There's no network that would give rise to self. What is that? Who is experiencing that? What does that even mean? If you don't have the brain function that gives rise to self, then what reality are you living out? This is a fascinating question, right? I ask people who've heard my spiel on what's going on in the fMRI machine to just let that go and meditate on what that lower slide actually means. And what we are looking for is ways to activate that network. Because self, or the feeling of being me, that's really important to a therapeutic outcome, to living one's life, to being an adult, to being even a child who is in developing their sense of self. So, that requires work at the level of the brain, and we can bring that effort online with neurofeedback. But what we may not be able to do is to alleviate the shock in the brainstem that keeps vibrating in that nervous system and keeps people liable to to more psychic pain than they ever need to suffer.
That's great. Thank you so much for talking about all this stuff. It's a broad and deep subject. I'm not sure that we've captured even maybe a little bit of the tip of it. One of the things that I kind of want to end with is that a kind of current that flows through this entire development for this conference, the work that Frank and you and Ruth Lanius have been doing. There seems to me this thread about neuroplasticity that is just it's just kind of the elephant in the room. That, this is when we started about the things that were not, that I didn't grow up with. My sense of things were that if you were crazy, like if I was crazy, then I was crazy for the rest of my days. That's just it. And the amazing promise of this work, and part of the reason that I'm really looking forward to this conference in October is that these are concrete changes that people can do themselves, can work on themselves, can learn, that they can be empowered through good therapeutic practices to actually get to a place where they're not experiencing these devastating circumstances, this level of fear that you're describing. I wonder if you can talk about what that process has been like for you to have this sense that, neuroplasticity is like really, it's an active force in all of this work.
Well, when I talk about the absence of a default mode network and that we can bring a default network online, what we're not talking about tissue generation, as far as I know. I mean, we could be, as far as I know. What we're talking about is functional connection in the brain that allows us to feel embodied. Do we live in a body? I have many of my patients who talk about their body as a appendage, or they talk about themselves as a walking head. Oh, right? This thought people, they don't really feel themselves in a body, and they know they walk to the grocery store, but they're not in the body that walks to the grocery store. And they're not able to be because this network is missing. It's not functioning. It's not missing those. It's not functioning. Okay. So the potential of it is always there. We can't bring that on with talk therapy. We try and try and try. I mean, I don't fault any therapist or any patient who's tried to do this in the way that we've known to do it, because it's all we've known. But now we know something more, right? And so how do we get that? And that's where the plasticity is. It's in this electrical functionality of the brain. And that's where we can appeal to the plasticity of the brain most directly. I mean, there are other approaches that people use as well, but most directly that. So that's the promise of neurofeedback. I think it's the only thing that I know of that directly influences neuroplasticity quickly and then somewhat reliably toward the function that we were all promised as a birthright, right? But many people didn't get, and they didn't get it primarily because, from all research we can tell, primarily because of the failure of attachment, and that leaves them with the residue of attachment shock in the brainstem. So those are the things we have to address, and we can, and that's astounding, exciting, and that's what we're going to talk about at Trauma 24. I think. Yeah, I know. That's what I'm talking about. And Ruth's going to be there, and Frank's going to be there. So I think that's what we're talking about.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sebern.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks for watching. If you found something helpful, use the like and subscribe. It helps us with YouTube algorithm and lets us know we're on the right track.